I should have been celebrating. That day was supposed to mark the end of years of study and long nights hunched over textbooks, the kind of day when a person feels their life is opening up like a fresh page. I had just walked across the stage, diploma in hand, my name announced over the loudspeaker, and when I returned to the banquet hall where my family and friends had gathered, I felt lighter than I had in years. The hall smelled of roast chicken and champagne. There were white tablecloths draped over every round table, and scattered in between were little golden programs printed with my name. My parents had traveled in my coworkers, had taken the day off, and even distant cousins I had not seen in years were seated in the back corner, chatting with the kind of false cheer people save for special occasions. I had spent weeks preparing for this evening. I had saved up for it, too. The catering, the venue, even the live jazz trio in the corner, had been booked under my name. I wanted it to be perfect. Alex arrived late as usual. He strolled in just as dessert was being set down, wearing a blazer one shade too shiny and a grin too wide to be sincere. He kissed me on the cheek for the benefit of the audience, though I caught the faint scent of whiskey on his breath. I let it go. Tonight was not the night to fight. I wanted to believe we could put aside the irritations that had piled up lately, his constant nights out, the secrecy with his phone, the way he joked about my career like it was something less than real work. When the band paused between songs, Alex clinked his glass with a fork and called for attention. My stomach sank the moment I saw the microphone in his hand. He had a fondness for the spotlight that rarely ended well for me. "Let's give it up for Olivia," he began, his voice booming over the speakers. Applause followed, warm and polite. Then he leaned into the microphone, smirking in my direction. "You think you're special because you saved a couple $100,000. That's nothing. I deserve half when we marry." The words struck harder than any slap. I felt my face burn as the crowd tittered, some laughing nervously, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. In my lap rested the folder that held my latest bank statement, which I had shown my parents earlier in the evening. $200,000 saved through years of discipline and sacrifice. $200,000 that represented my independence, my security, my future. Now it had become a punchline. I gripped the folder until the corners bent. The band shuffled awkwardly, unsure if they should resume. My mother pressed her lips together, clearly mortified, while Alex's mother chuckled like it was the cleverest joke she had ever heard. My chest tightened as I sat there, silent, pinned to the chair like a butterfly under glass. In that moment, I realized I was alone in the room. Surrounded by people, yes, but invisible nonetheless. It was my night, my milestone yet. The air buzzed with Alex's voice, with his arrogance, with his claim over money that was not his. I forced a smile. It was thin, brittle, the kind of smile you wear to survive an ambush. Glasses clinked, the party carried on, laughter rose again as though nothing had happened, but I could feel the shift. The humiliation was lodged under my skin, a splinter too deep to pull out quickly. I told myself to breathe, to endure. My grandmother used to say, "You learn more about people at your highest moments than at your lowest." Success draws out envy and entitlement like sugar draws flies. Sitting there in that banquet hall, I understood her words in a way I never had before. The rest of the night blurred. I nodded through congratulations, accepted hugs, posed for photographs. Yet every time Alex leaned in close, whispering jokes meant only for me, I felt my stomach churn. The partygoers saw a smiling couple. I saw the cracks spreading beneath the surface. What Alex did not know, what no one in that hall knew, was that his words would ignite something in me. This was not just a careless remark. It was a declaration, a claim laid bare before witnesses. And I intended to answer it, though, not tonight. For now I left the insult hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. I folded my folder neatly, slid it back into my bag, and rose when it was time to leave. On the drive home, the city lights streaked past the windows like blurred stars, and I promised myself that the next time Alex tried to humiliate me in public, it would not be me who left the room in silence. But that part, well, I'll explain in a moment. Tell me where you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. We need to talk about families, money, and the way pride can cut deeper than any blade. Morning came with the kind of pale light that makes a city look honest. You can see dust on the windows and headaches on faces. I made coffee, opened my phone out of habit, and scrolled. There it was, Alex's little square of performance, a sleek photo of oat milk next to a notebook, a caption dressed like wisdom. "Single until someone proves they deserve me. Know your worth." My thumb froze over the screen. We still shared a lease. My toothbrush lived next to his. My name was on the reservation for his cousin's wedding next month. Single. For a moment, I stared at the reflection of my own eyes in the black glass. I looked tired, older than the night before. I thought of the folder from the party crisp paper, careful numbers, 200,000 earned the hard way. Then I typed the simplest sentence I could manage, the kind that says everything without shouting. Good luck with that. I hit post. A tremor ran through me, the way a violin string quivers after a bow. Then I did something I had never done in my adult life. I changed my relationship status. Happily single. I tagged him so there would be no whispered versions later. Truth travels faster when its shoes are tied. Under 60 seconds after my comment went live, Alex's post disappeared. The coffee cup, the notebook, the lesson he meant to teach the world gone as if the app had suddenly remembered its manners. My phone erupted like a wasp nest. A cousin messaged me, a string of question marks. A colleague wrote, "Are you okay?" He posted something wild and then poof. The group chat with friends from grad school turned into a courtroom. Half the jurors wanted calm, the other half wanted blood. I set the phone face down and listened to it vibrate across the table like a trapped insect. There were signs, of course. There always are, though we call them quirks until they hurt. The phone face down at dinner. The late nights labeled team drinks that looked a little too polished on his stories. The way he said we when he meant me, and said me when he meant mine. I had ignored them because that is what you do when you want a life to behave. But his caption, that neat little sentence, turned the lights on in a room I had been avoiding. By noon, the drama had entered the office like a draft through a cracked window. I felt eyes on me in the break room. The microwave beeped like a metronome in a long song about politeness. My closest friend at work, Mara, slid me a paper cup in a whisper. "You didn't hear it from me," she said, "but Alex has been out to lunch with the new account lead 4 days straight. The one with the designer briefcase and the teeth you can see from space." She paused, grimaced. "I'm sorry." I nodded because what else is there to do when the news is something you already knew in your bones? On my lunch break, I opened Alex's page, then the account leads. A pattern shone like a path through snow. Likes on early morning gym photos, fire emojis under smug selfies. A casual comment about synergy, dotted with winking faces. I took screenshots not to throw them into the world, but to keep a ledger. People behave differently when they think time will erase the record. I wanted time to answer to me for once. By late afternoon, the family chorus began. His mother called and went straight to scolding the moment I answered. "My dear, you made him look foolish. Boys joke online. That doesn't mean anything. You've humiliated him." I kept my voice level. He told a room he deserved half my savings. Then he told the internet he was single. If humiliation is a crime, we're both doing time. She huffed. "You modern girls are dramatic." The line clicked dead. An hour later, a friend of his, I barely knew, sent a paragraph about maturity and grace. It read like an open letter, written for an audience of one himself. I blocked him, then sat in the restroom stall and cried the kind of tears that don't draw breath, quiet, efficient housekeeping tears. When I emerged, my face was clean and my resolve was steadier than morning coffee. That evening, the doorbell rang. Alex stood there with an apologetic smile that failed to touch his eyes, and behind him his mother with a casserole dish like a prop from a play about forgiveness. "We should talk," he said, stepping in before I agreed. They took the couch. I stayed standing. He began with a laugh. Baby, it was a quote. Everyone posts things like that. It's aspirational. We're in marketing, we sell dreams. He spread his hands. "And you changing your status, tagging me, that was petty." I listened. It is a habit I learned from older women. Let a man dig his own hole, and he will furnish it with his best words. His mother chimed in, "It's not wise to make private troubles public. Employers see these things." Her gaze dragged across my living room like a measuring tape. "And about money, marriage means sharing. Surely you don't expect to draw lines through everything. Family doesn't keep score." I thought of my grandmother's ledger book, the one with tidy columns and careful sums. She kept it not because she distrusted love, but because she respected math. Two truths can live in the same house if they know which closet to use. "I'm not married," I said. "And you don't get to declare public humiliation and then ask for privacy when the wind changes." I looked at Alex. If you wanted attention, you got it. He shifted, the smile hardening. "You're making me look toxic to people I work with. You know there's an important presentation coming, and this mess is distracting." You couldn't wait a day. There it was, the little center of the universe, where his worries live and mine pay rent. I walked to the door and opened it, the universal gesture of endings. "You should go," I said. "I have plans." He stood and tried one last angle, voice dropping to a confidential murmur. Listen, this other connection, strictly professional lunches. It's good for both of us if I keep options open. That's how people rise. You benefit when I'm bigger. He actually winked as if he had offered me a discount on betrayal. I could have had someone richer, he added under his breath, but you made me look like a problem. I felt something in me go completely still. A lake in winter, flat and hard, safe to cross without fear of falling through. You should be careful, I said softly. Some problems are only visible when you turn on a projector. He blinked confused. His mother clutched the casserole closer, as if I might pry off the lid and ruin dinner for a small village. They left with a flurry of sighs and dignity. I watched the elevator numbers descend, then returned to the kitchen table where my laptop waited, screen aglow. I organized the screenshots, dated the post, titled the folder like a case file. I am not a vengeful person by nature. I am a tidy person. Tidiness, in the end, is what revenge looks like when you grow up. Before bed, I stood by the window and watched the city do its late-night work buses, exhaling couples arguing in good coats, a delivery cyclist whistling into the cold. Alone is not the same as lonely. That is a lesson you cannot buy with money, though money helps buy the silence in which the lesson arrives. My coffee mug sat clean and empty in the rack. The phone lay face down, finally quiet. But what they did not know was this: while everyone gossiped about a caption and a status, a letter with a law firm seal was traveling toward me in the evening mail, and inside it was a decision my grandmother had made with a pen and a status. Witness stamp. Sometimes life rearranges itself the moment you step out of the way. It was a Wednesday morning when I first saw it. The screen lit up with a notification from my old email account, one I hadn't checked in years. Most people would have ignored it. I almost did, but the sender's name froze me in place: my parents. 5 years had passed since we last spoke. 5 years since they had cast me aside, their words sharp as blades. You give your savings to your sister, or you're no longer part of this family. I had walked out that night with nothing but my dignity, leaving behind the smell of roast beef from our weekly dinner and the echoes of my mother's voice calling me selfish. Now there it was, an email with the subject line, urgent, life or death. I stared at the screen, my coffee cooling beside me, the steam fading like the warmth I once felt toward them. My mind spun. Were they sick? Had something happened against my better judgment? I opened it. Olivia, we need you to come home this Saturday. This is serious. Please. No explanation, no apology, just urgency cloaked in a few cold words. For hours I sat at my desk, code half written on my monitor, mind tangled between anger and guilt. I could hear my grandmother's voice again, her soft warning. Family will test you most when they know what you have. I had nearly $200,000 saved, tucked safely in accounts my family no longer knew about. Was this why they were reaching out? Or was it truly life and death? I tried to push the thought away, but curiosity gnawed at me. I needed answers. Saturday came faster than I wanted. I drove the familiar road to my parents' house, past the old church where weddings and funerals blurred together, past the corner store where my father used to buy his cigarettes. My stomach tightened with every mile. When I pulled up, the house looked unchanged. Same chipped shutters, same creaking porch swing. But inside, the air was tense. My sister sat at the table, tapping at her phone. My parents looked up as if I were a stranger who had knocked by mistake. Olivia, my mother said, almost too sweet. We're glad you came. My father slid a folder across the table. A folder neat, heavy, and ominous. My name was written on a yellow tab in his handwriting. I hesitated before touching it. Open it, he said. Inside was a stack of papers. Loan documents overdue. Notices, figures that blurred together until one number cut through, like lightning: $150,000. My sister's debt. You're going to sell your house, my mother? Said her voice calm, as if she were asking me to pass the salt. Family helps family. The words echoed, pulling me back to that night 5 years ago. The laughter at the table, the ultimatum, the door slamming behind me. I looked up at them, my hands shaking but my voice steady. This again. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. My sister smirked and my father leaned back, waiting for my answer like a judge in court. But what they didn't know was that this time, I wasn't the same daughter they had cut off. I had built my own life, my own security, and I wasn't about to surrender it. I'll tell you what happened when I stood my ground. Tell me where you're watching from and make sure to subscribe. We need to talk about family debt and the price of loyalty. They called it an intervention. As if the word alone could soften the truth, as if they were saving me from some wild addiction. I sat on the edge of my own couch, while Alex spread himself wide in the center arms draped along the cushions, like a man claiming territory. His mother perched primly beside him, balancing a casserole dish on her lap, as if warm food could cover cold intentions. "You've embarrassed us," Alex began, his voice silky with that peculiar brand of false sympathy. "Changing your status online, tagging me in your little announcement, it made me look unstable. People at the office saw it." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and smirked. "Do you have any idea how much damage control I've had to do?" I looked down at the coffee table between us. On it lay my grandmother's porcelain dish, the one she gave me when I first moved into the city. White china, thin as eggshell, painted with tiny blue flowers. A reminder of another generation's patience of women who endured. My fingers traced its edge, and for the first time I felt a spark of rebellion stirring beneath my skin. His mother set the casserole on the table with a heavy thud. "Marriage is about compromise," she said in that clipped tone, the one she used whenever she wanted to disguise a command as advice. "Family doesn't draw lines between bank accounts. It's selfish to think otherwise." I met her eyes. "So family means public humiliation followed by entitlement. Interesting definition." She bristled, but Alex waved her off, eager to play the star. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. "Look," he said, turning it toward me. Rows of red hearts filled the display, every one of them stamped beneath gym photos of the new account lead at his firm. Harmless. Just engagement. I studied the glowing screen, then raised my own phone from the cushion beside me. With a calm thumb, I opened a folder labeled Receipts. Dozens of screenshots lit up in neat rows, his comments, his fire emojis, his late-night winks. The silence in the room sharpened when I set my phone down on the table between us, screen face up. "You've been leaving a trail for months," I said evenly. "This isn't about me making you look unstable. You've done that yourself." For the first time, his smile faltered. His mother's hand twitched toward the casserole, as if she might scoop it back into her lap and retreat to safer ground. Alex's voice dropped low, almost a growl. "You don't understand. Networking requires connections. That's all this island. If I end up close with someone wealthy, we both win. I could have had someone richer, but you ruined it by making me look toxic." The sentence hung in the air like smoke after a match is struck. I could have had someone richer. It was the clearest confession I would ever get, the raw truth laid bare without polish. And yet, even as my stomach nodded, something in me steadied. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch until he squirmed. "Do you hear yourself?" I asked. "Do you understand what you've just admitted?" He tried to backtrack, but the words were already out in the open, buzzing between us like a swarm of hornets. What they didn't know was that an email had arrived the day before, stamped with a law firm seal, the subject line crisp and official. Inside that envelope sat the beginnings of a shift they could not see, coming a shift that would turn their arrogance into ash. But I'll explain that part later. For now, I let them sit in their certainty, blind to what was coming. Tell me, have you ever had someone admit out loud that you were only a stepping stone? Comment if you have, because this is where my story stopped being about love and started being about survival. The truth, when it finally arrives, rarely knocks. It seeps under the door, slides into the cracks, flickers on a glowing screen in the quiet hours. That's how I found out. It was late. My apartment was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock above the stove. I sat curled on the couch with my laptop balanced on my knees, scrolling through the day's emails, when Mara, my closest friend at work, sent a single line. "You need to see this." Attached were screenshots. Not just likes on gym photos, not just emojis tossed like breadcrumbs, but entire threads. Messages between Alex and the new account lead laid out in cruel clarity, lunches disguised as meetings, jokes heavy with suggestion, talk of our future projects blurred with our future together. Each word was a blade. By the third page, I could hardly breathe. I set the laptop aside, pressing my palms into my eyes until colors swam in the dark. I thought of the graduation party of him declaring my savings a shared prize before a room of family and strangers. I thought of the smirk he wore when he told me I'd made him look toxic, and now this proof that I was nothing but a rung on his ladder, a placeholder, until he could climb to someone richer, shinier, more useful. The next morning I confronted him. No shouting, no storm. Just me at the kitchen table, the folder of screenshots stacked neatly before me like evidence in a trial. Explain, I said. He glanced at the folder, then at me, and for a moment I saw something raw flicker in his eyes. Fear, maybe. But then he leaned back, stretching his arms wide, as if he owned the air between us. Networking, he said smoothly. That's all. You think anyone makes it without strategic lunches, without keeping options open. Strategic lunches don't end with talk about moving in together. His jaw tightened. You've been snooping. No, I said, voice steady. You've been careless. Silence stretched. Then he dropped the last mask. Fine. You want honesty. I was testing the waters. I deserve better than being chained to someone hoarding 200,000 in a savings account like a dragon guarding scraps. I could have had someone richer, but you ruined it by making me look toxic. There it was again, those words spoken sharper, now stripped of pretense. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Betrayal should sting. Instead, it clarified. He was not a partner. He was a parasite dressed in ambition. But what Alex didn't know was that fate had already tilted in my favor. Hours earlier, I had opened a thick envelope sealed with a notary stamp. Inside was my grandmother's will recently updated. She had left me her estate, an old house on the coast, valued at more than $1,000,000. I hadn't told anyone. Not yet. But as Alex sat across from me dripping disdain, I realized the power of silence. I closed the folder, stood and said only this. Be careful, Alex. Some betrayals leave a paper trail. His laugh followed me down the hallway, but it sounded thin, uncertain. What he didn't know was that the next chapter of this story would not unfold in private. It would unfold at a holiday dinner, under the glow of chandeliers, with every witness he thought he controlled, watching his downfall in real time. But I'll explain that part later. Tell me, have you ever caught someone's betrayal, not in their words, but in the glow of a phone screen? Comment if you know that feeling. Because betrayal once seen can never be unseen. It was the kind of evening meant for peace. Candles flickered along the table, polished silverware caught the glow of the chandelier, and laughter rose from the far end, where Alex's cousins passed dishes heavy with ham and scalloped potatoes. It could have been a scene from a painting, if not for the storm I carried in my bag. I had chosen my seat carefully, halfway down the table where everyone could see me, but no one could box me in. Alex sat across his mother beside him, both dressed as if appearances were armor. He kept glancing at me smug and certain convinced that tonight would smooth everything over. What he didn't know was that I had packed more than a polite smile. Halfway through dinner, after the toasts, and before dessert, I stood. My chair scraped softly against the hardwood, the sound slicing through the chatter until the room fell still. I placed my laptop on the table and connected it to the small projector I had borrowed from work. The white wall at the far end became my canvas. The first image appeared. Alex's messages time-stamped his compliments, lined up like soldiers in a parade. Gasps rippled down the table. His mother's fork clattered against her plate. Alex froze his face, drained of color, then flooded with red. This, I said evenly, is what loyalty looks like in Alex's world. Slide after slide, I laid out the case, the lunches, the private jokes, the talks of our future that had nothing to do with me. Every screenshot dated, every message preserved. The silence in the room deepened with each page. Then I pulled out the envelope, thick with legal weight. A notary stamp gleamed in the corner, the ink still fresh. I held it up for all to see before sliding the contents onto the table. My grandmother's estate, I said. Worth more than $1,000,000. It belongs to me, and to me alone. Gasps turned into whispers. Alex's mother pressed her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. Alex stood abruptly, knocking over his glass. You're humiliating me, he snapped, his voice cracking. No, I said softly, but every word carried. You humiliated yourself when you treated me as a bank account with legs. Tonight, I'm just giving the truth a microphone. The projector's glow reflected in the silver serving trays in the stunned faces of his relatives. The dinner that was meant to showcase family unity had become a courtroom, and Alex was exposed under its brightest light. For a long moment, no one moved. Then his aunt at the far end cleared her throat and murmured, Well, I suppose that settles it. Her tone carried more finality than any judge's gavel. Alex's mother began to cry quietly, shoulders trembling. Alex himself sank back into his chair, fists clenched, lips pressed tight, as though words could no longer serve him. I gathered my papers, closed the laptop, and looked around the table. Enjoy your meal, I said. My voice was steady, almost calm. I'm finished with this course. I walked out into the winter night, leaving the golden light of the chandelier behind me. The cold air stung, but it felt like freedom. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this dinner was only the prelude. I still held one last move, and it would not just end Alex's game at home. It would end it at the company where he had built his little kingdom. But I'll tell you that part in a moment. Have you ever watched someone's mask slip in front of their entire family? Comment if you've seen it happen, because once the mask falls, there's no putting it back on. The Monday after the holiday dinner, I walked into Alex's company with a folder tucked neatly under my arm. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and overbrewed coffee, the kind of place where ambition was lacquered onto every surface. I had called ahead, arranged a quiet meeting with human resources, and now the receptionist was leading me down a corridor lined with glass offices. The HR manager, a woman named Denise, greeted me with a professional smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She gestured toward a chair, and I set the folder on her desk. "Everything you need is in here," I said. She opened it slowly, her brow furrowing as she flipped through pages of screenshots, printed emails, even calendar invites that matched the so-called lunch meetings. Her expression tightened as the weight of the evidence sank in. "These are substantial," she said carefully. "Substantial enough," I replied, to show a pattern. He leveraged company time and resources for personal gain, compromised client relationships, and mocked the firm in messages that could very well surface online. I leaned back slightly. "I thought you'd want to know before it becomes public." She exhaled a long, controlled breath. "You understand we'll need to investigate this formally." "Of course." What she didn't say, but what we both knew, was that the investigation would not take long. Alex's digital fingerprints were everywhere. His arrogance had left trails brighter than neon. That afternoon, while I was back at my own office, Mara messaged me. They pulled him from the presentation. Word is he's suspended. I closed my laptop and allowed myself a small, quiet smile. By Wednesday, the story had leaked. Someone inside the firm had whispered to someone else, and soon the details were bubbling across LinkedIn, that polished stage where reputations dance or die. A post appeared from a concerned employee, vague enough to dodge legal trouble, but sharp enough to draw blood. Within hours, the comment section was a feeding frenzy. Toxic culture, leaders exploiting staff, proof that entitlement has no ceiling. The irony was not lost on me. Alex had always prided himself on building connections, on curating his image like a fine suit. Now his downfall was trending, not because I shouted it into the void, but because truth spreads faster than any marketing campaign. Late one night, as I scrolled through the swelling storm of posts, my phone buzzed. An email from a recruiter. "We've seen your work at your current firm and would love to talk. The role is senior compensation, nearly double. Interested?" I laughed softly into the empty room. Betrayal had opened a door I hadn't even known existed. While Alex scrambled to salvage his image, I was being handed opportunities he could only dream of. But what no one at the office knew was that I wasn't finished. The dinner had been about family. The HR folder was about career. My final move would be about legacy, about what I chose to build now that I was free. Because revenge at its sharpest is not destruction, it's creation. I'll explain that in the next chapter. Tell me, have you ever watched someone's career collapse, not because of gossip, but because their own words buried them? Comment if you've seen it, because sometimes the quietest revenge is letting the truth do the talking. After Alex's suspension turned into quiet whispers of termination, the air around me felt lighter. I walked through the city like someone unshackled, every step sharper, every breath easier. Yet freedom without direction can feel like floating, and I knew I needed to anchor myself, not to him, not to anyone else, but to something I would own. That week, I signed the final documents with the estate lawyer. My grandmother's house, valued at more than one high trio dollar, was now mine. The deed, stamped and sealed, sat heavy in my hand, a weight both literal and symbolic. I ran my fingers over the embossed paper, thinking of her voice, her lessons in thrift and pride. "Money is not love," she once told me, "but it keeps wolves outside your door." I sold the coastal property within months, not because I didn't love it, but because I needed liquidity. The buyer, a retired couple from Boston, wired the funds, and suddenly my account balance carried more zeros than I had ever dared to imagine. I rented a new apartment overlooking Central Park, high ceilings, tall windows, quiet enough that I could hear my own thoughts again. But the money wasn't the story. What mattered was what I did with it. I sat at that polished dining table in my new place, drawing plans late into the night. Not revenge, at least, not in the simple sense. Creation. I began drafting the outline of a boutique marketing firm, one designed to serve women-owned businesses, the kind of clients Alex's old company dismissed as too small to bother. Every choice I made felt like stitching a new garment from scraps. I filed paperwork, spoke with accountants, reached out to my network. To my surprise, the same story that had humiliated me, the viral whispers about Alex's collapse, made people curious about me. Clients called not to ask about him, but to say, "We heard you handled yourself with dignity. Can we work with you?" The first contract I signed was modest, a local designer launching her own clothing line. The second was larger, a health startup ready to invest heavily in branding. By the third, I realized I no longer needed Alex's shadow to measure my worth. Yet, there were nights when loneliness crept in. I would sit by the tall window sipping tea, the lights of the city scattered like jewels below me. The apartment was beautiful, but beauty does not always fill silence. I thought of the graduation party of laughter that turned cruel, of how a room full of people could make someone feel invisible. Humiliation lingers even when success follows. One evening, Mara joined me for dinner, and after a glass of wine, she said, "You realize you've built something out of nothing, right? You're not just surviving, you're rewriting the story." Her words settled over me like a quilt. She was right. My revenge was no longer just about Alex's downfall. It was about ensuring no one could ever claim me as a possession, a wallet, a stepping stone again. Still, one thought kept me restless. Alex hadn't yet faced me directly. He had slunk from dinner tables, from offices, from the glow of his own failed reputation. But I knew sooner or later he would try to return to reclaim some shard of what he lost. And I needed to be ready. Because revenge isn't truly complete until the one who tried to take everything from you realizes they have nothing left. That moment was coming. Tell me, have you ever taken something broken and turned it into your own kind of weapon? Comment if you have, because sometimes survival itself is the sharpest blade. It happened sooner than I expected. One crisp evening, I was leaving a networking event at a midtown hotel, the kind with velvet curtains and hors d'oeuvres too small to fill a child. My firm had just signed its 5th client, and the champagne in my hand had been a toast to growth, to independence. As I stepped into the cool night air, a voice called my name. "Olivia." I turned, and there he was, Alex. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow. The confident smirk that once carried him through every room was gone. He looked smaller somehow, as though the scaffolding of arrogance had finally collapsed. "I just need 5 minutes," he said quickly, almost pleading. I could have walked away. I thought about it. But something in me wanted closure, not for him but for myself. I nodded toward the cafe across the street. We sat at a corner table, the hum of conversation around us, a buffer. He leaned forward, hands clasped, and began his rehearsed speech. "I lost everything. The firm cut me off, clients won't answer my calls. People think I'm toxic because of what you showed. But we could start again. You've done well, I see that. If we combined resources, built something together..." I stopped him with a raised hand. "You still don't understand, do you?" His brow furrowed. "This was never about resources. It was about respect. You paraded my savings like a trophy. You used me as a rung on your ladder. And when you thought you could do better, you planned a future with someone else while keeping me in your back pocket. Now you want to come back because your options are gone." He opened his mouth, but I pressed on, voice steady. "My grandmother's estate, the inheritance, the firm I built, those are mine. You get nothing. Not my money, not my time, not my silence." For the first time, he seemed to realize there was no angle left to play. His shoulders slumped and the fight drained from his face. He muttered something about mistakes and second chances, but I no longer cared. I stood, left a few bills for the untouched coffee, and walked out into the night. The city stretched before me alive, with lights and noise, and for once I felt perfectly aligned with it. I had rebuilt myself from humiliation, stitched a new life from betrayal's scraps. The revenge wasn't just in exposing him, it was in proving to myself that I could rise higher than he ever imagined. At the next networking event, I stood beneath the chandeliers with a glass of wine, laughing with new partners, confident in my place. I thought of my grandmother, of her careful ledgers and quiet wisdom, and I whispered inwardly, "You were right, wolves stay outside when you own the door." So here I am, whole and unbroken, telling this story not for sympathy, but for truth. If you think I made the right choice, comment right. If you have a better way, share your idea. I want to hear your revenge plan.